Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Today, we're going to be doing a 2028 tier list rankings for potential Republican candidates for president. And there's a list of 14 most realistic candidates that I gathered at the very top of this list, the first row of consisting of 14 candidates, and we have 5 columns to put them in, either bad, below average, decent, great, or the next Trump to take over the party when his term is up, obviously. But before we get started with the rankings, make sure you guys are subscribed. Click the bell so you don't miss out my content. Press the like button. Share this video. Don't forget, we do have memberships. If you're interested, you can find links to that in the description section. And just a reminder, this is not based on who has the best chance of being nominated. This is actually based on who is the actual strongest candidate of them all. So let's start off with basically the worst candidate out of the realistic ones that could run in 2028 as a Republican nominee or for the nomination. Marjorie Taylor Greene, I think, is probably the worst candidate up here. I know a lot of the MAGA base won't agree with this, but she is someone who's far right, an extremist on the Republican side, and she won't get any moderates at all. In fact, she won't even get Republican moderates. She would only appeal to the very, very most far right. And that's not going to go anywhere. She won't have a Rust Belt appeal. She won't even have a Sun Belt appeal. Matter of fact, she won't have an appeal to basically anyone outside of the far right at all. And I don't think she can find any common ground with your average voter whatsoever. And she would get absolutely destroyed. Not only in the general election because she won't even make it that far. In fact, she won't even make it past Iowa. I think she would be one of the first to drop out if she were to run, and I think there is a good chance she does end up running because she is getting up there in age. I mean, she's still pretty, a young candidate compared to the rest. Obviously, only 50 as of right now. But I do imagine she will run in 2028 for the primaries, but she's going to get absolutely obliterated in the primaries as well. I think she won't get anywhere past, 5%. And then you have the below average candidate, which will be Nikki Haley. Obviously, we saw her run in the 2024 primaries, and in fact, she did make it to Iowa. I believe she made it with 3 candidates, which were DeSantis, her, obviously, and Vivek Ramaswamy, who he only ran for the first time ever in his career, and he still managed, I believe, to get 8% in the Iowa caucus, which is pretty decent. We'll get to him later. But Nikki Haley is not a great candidate. She's definitely not the next Trump, obviously, nowhere near that. And I would not quite say she's a decent candidate. Therefore, I'm going to put her below average. I think she will lose in a general election against most Democrats, whether it's Shapiro, Newsom. She would even lose against Newsom. And if it's AOC, which I don't think it's going to be, I think there's a really good chance she actually might lose against her as well. I just don't think she has the hype at all. And if she does run in 2028, which I think she very well is going to because she dropped out and ended up endorsing Donald Trump, which, is a signal that she will probably run in 2028. I only see her getting past the Iowa caucus, and then she would probably get second place behind J.D. Vance or DeSantis or someone else. But we'll get to those candidates later. I just think she's not a strong candidate in the general election whatsoever. I think she has a somewhat good chance of getting past the primary, but she would get crushed in a general election. That would be basically an easy win for any Democratic candidate, even if it's a weak one. And then you have the decent candidates, starting off with, the South Carolina Senator Tim Scott, who ran in the 2024 primaries. Obviously, he ended up dropping out before Iowa. He couldn't make it, so he's not the best candidate. But in my opinion, he's slightly, below average. Therefore, that would be basically average. I think he's just your average candidate. I mean, you can say he can do better with African American voters, but it doesn't really necessarily mean that's going to be the case. I just don't think he really brings anything to the table at all. I'll just say he's a decent candidate, and he's not going to get past the primaries anyways. I mean, he'll be lucky to make it to Iowa, which he probably won't anyways. But with Trump out, I think it would open up the door for candidates like Tim Scott to make improvements because the vote share from Trump is going to split because he won't run in 2028. But if J.D. Vance does run, I think it's going to hurt some of these candidates like J.D. Vance because most of that vote from Trump will go to Vance. So it won't really bring that many opportunities to someone like Tim Scott or Nikki Haley at all. And then another decent candidate is going to be the governor of Georgia, Brian Kemp, who there's rumors that he's running for Senate in the 2026 midterms, which would really help out Republicans, because if he doesn't run for the Senate in 2026, I think Democrats can very well win the Senate again in Georgia for the 2026 midterms. But if he does run, obviously that's going to lock down his home state of Georgia, which is looking like it's in jeopardy for Republicans. I made tons of videos about how Georgia could go blue on the general election in 2028, the general election, if Republicans don't play their cards correctly, because it was within 2 points. Actually, Trump didn't do that well in that state, even though it was considered a flip. I think futuristic-wise, Georgia is trending towards the Democratic direction. So if Brian Kemp does end up being the nominee, which he most likely will not, I do think there is a chance he does make it to Iowa, but it's not going to be that far into it. Therefore, I think he would drop out probably, a few months after announcing, after the start of the primaries. So he's just a decent candidate. He is weak in the Rust Belt, which Republicans need to play heavy focus in the Rust Belt, because without the blue wall states, they cannot win elections at all. I mean, if they lose Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, it's basically over. They can still win the entire Sun Belt, Arizona, Georgia, even Nevada, and they still will fall short if they don't get at least one of the three Rust Belt states. In my opinion, Brian Kemp will win 0 Rust Belt states against majority of Democratic candidates, which is why he is not considered a great candidate. Therefore, I won't put him there. He's just a little decent as your average Republican for your Republican voter. And then Josh Hawley, obviously, I believe senator from Missouri. He's also a pretty decent candidate for your average Republican. Yet again, average Republican, not in the general election. He won't make it past Iowa. He is from the Midwest. That has nothing to do with the Rust Belt, obviously. He is not going to win at least one Rust Belt state, which is what Republicans need for going forward in 2028. Democrats would easily win the blue wall. And you can say he's good in the Sun Belt, but whether or not he is, it doesn't matter. He's not going to make it past a general election. He's just a decent candidate for your average Republican voter. Same thing goes for Ted Cruz. Obviously, he's going to lock down the Sun Belt because he's from Texas. He would easily win that border state. And you can argue he will easily win Arizona and Nevada or Georgia as well. But when it comes to specifically those blue wall states, from the Rust Belt, Ted Cruz is not going to come close to winning them. I mean, you can say it will be competitive, but if Democrats run an average decent candidate, doesn't have to be the greatest against some of these candidates on the Republican side, like Ted Cruz, Josh Hawley, Brian Kemp, then Democrats will most likely flip back the blue wall in 2028, because Donald Trump is basically the only candidate I can name that is that strong in the Rust Belt, with the exception for J.D. Vance. And then you have Marco Rubio. I also do think he's pretty much a decent candidate. I think he can make some appeal to moderates, potentially independents as well, which makes him a little bit better than Ted Cruz and some of these other candidates up here. He would do way better than most of these candidates among Hispanic voters, similar to Donald Trump's numbers. Maybe he could put up Donald Trump numbers, actually, because Trump won 46%, nearly half of the Hispanic vote in the 2024 election. So I can imagine Marco Rubio would put up similar numbers. Well, it would really depend on the environment as well, and the border issue would be calm and won't be that much of an issue because of Trump's policies, obviously, so people won't focus on that much more. But it would mean that he would lock down Florida. That's already a solid red state, regardless of the candidate, so that really does not matter. But it does not give Republicans an advantage when it comes to the Rust Belt, which is what they need to focus on. So he's not a great candidate. I'd say he's decent, and I won't be shocked if he does make it past Iowa. I think he very well can. He ran in 2016. He didn't do that great, but also he didn't do that bad. So I would say he's decent. And then you have Chris Sununu from New Hampshire, former governor of New Hampshire, not anymore. I do believe he will run in 2028. I think he's a decent candidate, and the main reason why is because obviously he's in a blue state. I would consider New Hampshire to be a blue state. I mean, Kamala Harris won it by 3 points, and a less favorable environment for her. So just imagine 2028, where the nation would probably shift a little more to the left. New Hampshire is a likely Democratic state, in my opinion. So if you put someone like Chris Sununu in the general election for Republican nomination side, then I think that would mean he has a great chance of winning New Hampshire. That would get them 4 electoral votes, but 4 is not really that much. It would help them in states like New York or Pennsylvania and partially the Rust Belt, but still, I think he's not going to do that great. And then we have one more decent average candidate before we move on to the great candidates, which will be Vivek Ramaswamy, entrepreneur, obviously, and he is going to run for the governor of Ohio because he ended up leaving Dodge. Government efficiency with Elon Musk, and the main reason why he left Dodge was because of obviously he faced backlash regarding two H-1B visas with Elon Musk, which made him leave, and because of that, he is now running for governor of Ohio. And with all that backlash, I think that really could have ended his political career. I'm not going to count him out just yet, but that made him go from a great candidate to a decent candidate because, like I mentioned earlier, he ran for the first time in 2024, and I believe still managed to get 8%, third place in the Iowa caucus, behind Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis. And DeSantis is a very strong candidate, so I think he did good in 2024, considering that was the first time in ever his political career to run. So I thought he was a uprising political star among the GOP base, but because of what happened with Doge and basically now he left, I think that really is going to hurt him. So now he's going from a great to a decent candidate. I think he can do good, in some of the Midwestern states, which is where he's from, specifically the Rust Belt as well. But other than that, I just don't think he's going to win a general election because he doesn't have. I think the GOP would be split, the party will be divided, and because he doesn't have that base, that coalition to really help him, that's something Donald Trump has, he might not make it past the general election. And now we have some of these great candidates, starting off with Greg Abbott, the governor of Texas. I think he's a great candidate. He's obviously popular, very popular in his own home state of Texas. I think he will do wonders in the Sun Belt. He will lock down Arizona. He will definitely lock down Nevada and Georgia as well. I think he would win Georgia by like around maybe 5 to 6 percentage points, doing way better than Donald Trump. I think there's actually a few Republican candidates that will do better in Georgia specifically than Donald Trump. But as far as the Rust Belt goes, yet again, I can't name anyone else besides J.D. Vance and Donald Trump that is as good in the Rust Belt than Trump himself. Greg Abbott will not do good in the Rust Belt where it matters the most, but still, I think he will make it close. He will make it competitive. He will make it hard to fight for. Therefore, he is a great candidate. I think the majority of the Republican base, whether it's moderate Republicans, your average Republicans, or even MAGA or the far right ones, they all love Greg Abbott. So I think if he does win the nomination, which there's a decent chance I think he might. I'm not saying he will. I don't think he will. I think at this point it's likely J.D. Vance because he has Trump's backing, obviously, of course. I think he will make the general election very competitive, but he will fall short ultimately at the end of the day. And I think another great candidate is Ron DeSantis himself. He ran in 2024, getting second place as expected behind Donald Trump. And there was a lot of talk that he was going to replace Donald Trump eventually. And then there comes J.D. Vance out of nowhere. Donald Trump picks him as the VP, and now there's talks that he can become the next Donald Trump, which is why I'm going to give J.D. Vance his own tier, his own category as potentially the next Donald Trump. But we go back to Ron DeSantis. I think is a very good candidate. He is literally the reason. If it wasn't for DeSantis, or you can argue Donald Trump's endorsement of Ron DeSantis, then Florida would not be as red as it is today. He won it by 20 points, 19% in the 2022 midterms. He also carried Marco Rubio. And, you can argue Rick Scott as well. And therefore, because Ron DeSantis proves that he can carry other Republicans to victory in the state of Florida, I think he can do wonders as the Republican nominee in the general election. He would lock down the Sun Belt completely. Republicans would not have to worry about that, meaning they would spend all their money focused on the Rust Belt. And therefore, I don't think he's going to do that well in the Rust Belt because he's not Donald Trump or J.D. Vance. That's why I gave Vance his own category, because he's someone from the Rust Belt like Donald Trump, who was from the Rust Belt, you know who can fight hard for those three Rust Belt states. DeSantis can't really do that, but because he's a good enough candidate, I think there's a chance he does get one of the three, but I don't think he would get that. So he's a great candidate, not the best. And then you have Lee Zeldin, former, representative of New York, former nominee for governor. He actually almost defeated Kathy Hochul, only lost by 6 points in a state that Biden won by, over 20 percentage points, and Kamala Harris won it by 11 points, and he only lost it by 6. So that's like a 5-point swing. So Lee Zeldin actually overperformed Donald Trump in the state of New York, which is why I think he's a great candidate, which is where I'm going to put him at. I think that you can make the case he might be better than Greg Abbott even. I'm not quite sure about Ron DeSantis, but still, I think Lee Zeldin, if he does end up making the nomination, which I think if more voters know him, because not a lot of people know him, I think if you give him a chance, he can do good things as a Republican nominee, and I think he would do good in a general election. The issue is that his name recognition is pretty much poor, therefore it won't make him go far. So if we just have the name recognition, he would be a very good candidate. He would win over tons of moderates, independents on his side, because he's not someone who's, considered, I wouldn't say he's MAGA, even though he likes Donald Trump. He's definitely not far right. He is more moderate, and I think that can make him appeal to more of those Rust Belt voters, which is where it matters the most. Those blue wall states, I think Lee Zeldin matches up pretty well with your average Democrat in the blue wall states. Obviously, New York, I think he'll be strong in the Rust Belt, maybe a little bit weaker in the Sun Belt, but still Republicans most likely have that locked under control. And then you have the last great candidate before we move on to J.D. Vance, which I know I ranked him, but I still didn't get to talk about him that much, even though I did somewhat. You have Glenn Youngkin, current governor of Virginia. I think he's a great candidate, and the reason why is because he's a Republican governor in a very blue state. I know Virginia in 2024 was seen as a swing state, a battleground state. Some polls are showing Trump was beating Biden at one point until he had dropped out. But then Kamala Harris ended up winning it by over 5 percentage points, making the statement that it is still a very blue state because she actually overperformed the polls. And I think Virginia is actually shifting towards the left. So because Glenn Youngkin is a Republican governor in a very blue state, I think that means one thing. He's a very strong candidate, and he wins over not only moderates, but maybe some moderate Democrats as well. And that means there's a very good chance he does end up winning the state of Virginia with its 13 electoral votes. Extremely important. That would be good on the electoral map, electorally. That would give Republicans a huge advantage from the state of Virginia if they nominate Glenn Youngkin, and that would open up the door for him to win some of those Rust Belt states as well, and he wouldn't even have to worry not just one bit in the Sun Belt states because that would be locked down for Republicans, making Glenn Youngkin such a strong candidate. I think for Republicans to do well in 2028, they should probably nominate these three candidates, either J.D. Vance, which we're now going to get to, Glenn Youngkin, or Lee Zeldin. Those are the three candidates I think that are the strongest. Now, lastly, to wrap this thing up, J.D. Vance, obviously he's the current Vice President of the United States. I think there's potential that he is the next Trump. I see a lot of the MAGA base already loving him and already saying they will support him in 2028. I think he has probably the best chance of becoming the nominee, and if he is the nominee, I think he will make the race in 2028 very close, competitive, very tight. I think there's a decent shot he does win the presidency in 2028. It really depends on a few factors, like who the Democrats nominate. If they choose Josh Shapiro, for example, I think Vance might actually lose. If they choose someone like Newsom, then I think that will significantly boost J.D. Vance's chances. It really depends on who the other side nominates. But other than that, he's very strong in the Rust Belt. He will win the Sun Belt. He will win over some independents and moderates. He's not extreme at all whatsoever like Marjorie Taylor Greene. So that's pretty much it. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Which ones you agree with or disagree with, and why. Who do you think will be the nominee in 2028, or who is the strongest candidate? One last final reminder to subscribe, click the bell so you don't miss all my content, press the like button, share this video. Don't forget, we do have memberships. You can find links to that in the description section if you are interested. Thank you everyone for watching.